Welcome to episode 1 of the Footy A2Z podcast. Join me, Zach Baruas, as we take deep dives into the A to Zs of Australian rules football, engage with the footy community, and together, get to the bottom of some of the hottest topics in the game. Let me tell you, we have an action-packed podcast planned for you today, as we take a closer look at one of the biggest can of worms in the AFL, Rule Changes. Very shortly, we'll be hearing what Jesse from True Footy has to say on the topic.
I think this is one of the few years as an AFL fan where rule changes have come and influenced the game and people have generally been happy with it.
Discussing what the r/AFL Reddit community has to say, Pimento Sandwich says the limit on interchange makes them vomit. And unpacking some of their answers with co-host and co-creator of the Footy A2Z YouTube channel, Andreas.
It's been a topic that footy fans have been annoyed about for a while, but it seems like, rule interpretations change week to week.
But first, a recap on the AFL and the latest rule changes. Everyone knows there are 3 certainties in life: death, taxes, and... well, the AFL seems to have decided the ominous third dot point is rule changes. Since 2019, the AFL has altered the rules a whopping 13 times, including 4 changes introduced for the season this year. For those who need a refresher, 3 of these rules were announced shortly after the conclusion of the 2020 Premiership season, these being the stand rule, requiring the player on the mark to remain stationary until play on is called, the mark at kick-ins pushed back from 10 metres away to 15 metres, and the interchange cap was reduced from 90 to 75. With the injury sub-rule being announced in the weeks leading up to round 1. Speaking on these changes, Steve Hocking had said that all these rule changes were an attempt to open up congestion around the ground and give the ball carrier more options to dispose of the ball and ultimately increase scoring. Since 2013, scoring has gradually been on the decline, with Hawthorn's first win of the three-peat being the last year that the average score was over 90. In 2020, after adjusting for reduced game time, this decreased to 75.8, down from 80.2 the year before. In this window since 2013, the AFL's defensive tactics have rapidly evolved too, with modern coaches opting for zone-style defences rather than a traditional player-on-player approach, while recent years in particular have seen the emergence of high-pressure defensive styles of play, such as the 2016 Bulldogs and the 2017 to present Richmond Tigers. In theory, the AFL hopes to negate these tactics and make it harder for teams to defend space, and open up the game into something that is more watchable to viewers. To discuss this relationship between coaching ingenuity, rule changes, and the ultimate fans experience, we caught up with AFL content creator and the man behind the True Footy YouTube channel, Jesse McClure. Jesse, it's a pleasure to have you on. Let's jump straight into things. So what's your thoughts been on rule changes this year? Like, what's the general fan experience been like?
I think this is one of the few years as an AFL fan where rule changes have come and influenced the game and people have generally been happy with it. I think it's really brought, for the first time in a while, certainly at the start of the season, there was clearly more scoring. It opened up the play as fans of, or as a fan rather, of big key forwards having influence on the game. I think the way the players opened up and teams can play more direct football through the corridor, we're seeing, key forwards have a bigger impact on the game than they have in several years. So yeah, for the first time in a while, I'm pretty happy with the rule changes this year.
Yeah, nice. Do you attribute that mostly to the stand rule, or do you think it's kind of a combination of everything coming together?
I think it's hard to say. I'm probably inclined to say it's a combination of everything, but also probably as much as anything, I think it's a psychological switch that's been taken place with players and coaches. It feels like the game's more open, so players are more inclined to move the ball directly and quickly. And I'm not out there on the field, so that's only a theory, but I heard it on AFL on the couch, and I think it's pretty compelling when coaches and players feel like the game's more open. We start to see a more direct sort of brand of footy.
Right, so it's almost just that that copycat nature. It's like, it's working for them, it might work for us.
Exactly, kind of almost like a weird placebo effect.
Yeah, definitely. Kind of like changing tact, if I were to ask you to describe your ideal style of footy, like a game or just kind of a general state of play, like what would that look like for you?
I think being an Eagles fan probably influences this because this is a very Eagles style brand of play. But I love seeing good skills and the ball moving around the field as a product of good foot skills. So kicking the ball, 45 on a 45-degree angle with like a high velocity moving around the field and running play, fast players overlapping each other. For me, that's the best product.
Yeah, nice. And how close would you say we are to that? Like, how often do we get that as an average game? Is it only something that happens when the Eagles are at their best, or do we see it a lot?
I think in terms of the Eagles, I think we see flashes of it even when they're not playing well, which is good, and it makes it entertaining as a fan. But I think generally across the league, teams that can really execute that style are probably kind of few and far between. I wouldn't say that it's commonplace. It's certainly more so this year, but it was only last year we were saying, the game's a very dour, scrappy defensive affair. And I think, I don't know what the data suggests, but I think as the season wears on, teams are starting to go that way again. So I think, to answer your question, it's kind of more like a rare treat, that really good product that I'm thinking of.
Yeah. You did touch on, you mentioned the C word in AFL, which is coaches, obviously.
Yeah.
How much do you think is coach dependent, Emma? How much do you think is rule dependent?
That's a good question. I think a lot of it is probably coach dependent, to be honest. Because like I said, if I kind of hold the belief that there's some sort of, like, the mindset this year has been as much of an impact on the faster play as the rules. But I think there will always be coaches that sort of, like, for instance, last year, I think with the 666, there was a talk that coaches were more conservative in response to the rule changes and therefore didn't take risks in terms of their game plan, and therefore we saw more defensive football than ever. I think, going by that logic, it's probably fair to suggest that how a coach chooses to sort of coach his players and the game plan that he chooses to employ probably has a greater effect on, the brand of football that team plays.
Yeah, awesome. It's a good answer. And finally, we'll kind of look to wrap things up. And I'll put you on the spot here. If you could make one rule change, what would it be? Or even if you could take one rule away or alter it in some way?
Ooh, that is a tough one. I don't know if this counts, but I'm not a fan of score reviews. Does that count? I would get rid of that.
I'm not sure.
Sure.
You would rather just it is what it is?
Yes, I think in terms of the technology that we currently have to employ, I think the delay and the continued result of inconclusive umpires call, it's not living up. So I would scrap that until they've got better technology.
Yeah, fair enough. Yeah, definitely. I think just invest in better technology.
Yeah, probably. That's probably the better answer. Yeah.
Anyways, it was good to have a short but entertaining chat. Cheers for coming on, and hopefully we'll have you back on soon.
For sure. Thanks for having me.
If you want to hear more of Jesse, be sure to check out the True Footy YouTube channel for weekly tips, podcasts, and more. While Jesse had some pretty positive things to say about the rule changes, not everyone shares the same opinion. Earlier in the week, we posted in the r/AFL Reddit page to grab the community's perspective on the rule changes so far. In our new segment, You Read It Here First, we'll be going through some of the best answers. Empty Salami says they were pretty excited about the stand rule. Giving the kicker more latitude has definitely made it easier for key forwards, who could start deeper and hit up the footy rather than having to fight in packs of 10 after dump kicks. See Taylor Walker's resurgence. Sid1188 says they're not a fan of any of them. The 15-metre mark for scouts is fine, I guess, but there was no need to change the rule. The concussion sub started as a good idea, but has been watered down to be too similar to the old sub rule that got criticised in years past. And the stand rule is a disaster to enforce, only gets paid in the most nitpicky or frustrating circumstances, and serves basically no purpose. It's a rule that no one asked for, solves a problem that never existed, and brings unnecessary problems with it. Pimento Sandwich says the limit on interchange makes them vomit. The last quarter of the GWS and Eagles game was a shit show of exhausted players and resulted in terrible skills. It didn't favour anybody, but was disappointing to see. I just don't get why the AFL wants players to be so tired. Vidria Revolver says the stand on the mark rule might be annoying for the opposition, but has really opened up the game for the attacking team, and we're now seeing teams be able to move the ball easier up the field, and more specifically, hit up the shorter targets. Having more space to run forward from a fullback kick-out might have helped to open up the game as well, and is helping teams get past zones that lock the ball in, where the zones are now 70 metres back instead of 50 metres. This has meant teams are kicking at long more too, for example Zach Tui's longest ever fullback kick-out at Marvel. That concludes today's episode of You Read It Here First. To get involved next week, be sure to keep an eye out on the r/AFL subreddit and leave a comment with your thoughts on the weekly topic. Now let's head over to Andreas to unpack the episode so far. Andreas, there was quite a disparity between some of the Reddit's comments and the comments that Jesse had made earlier, with generally the Reddit's comments being a lot harsher. Why did you think that was the case?
I think a lot of the frustration people have with the rule changes centers around, this feeling that the league is kind of tinkering. So, we've changed the rules a lot over the course of the last 5 years. And I think people just want a chance for things to settle down. And also the frustration as well, I think, stems in the inconsistencies in the way that things are officiated. It's been a topic that footy fans have been annoyed about for a while, but it seems like, rule interpretations change week to week. And I think, when you combine that with rules that are new, then people who, think they know what footy is and then find out that they don't start to get frustrated.
Yeah, I agree. I reckon a lot of people don't actually contest rule changes, but are more thinking, let's just get the current rules right first, and then we can talk about rule changes.
Yeah, definitely. Especially, with things like this kick-in rule that they've changed again this year to, pull the man on the mark further back. It's like, well, why don't we just leave it the way it was for a couple of years and see how that plays out before we then start tinkering with it again?
Yeah, definitely. You seem to have a bit of an idea as to just why this is, like why it seems so complicated and such a hard thing for the AFL to just get a clear grasp on.
If you look at, the history of Australian rules football, rules change all the time. Like going back from the 1850s when the first rules were written down, we only had 10 of them. These days, the rule book is multiple pages long. So it's not like rule changes are a new thing. We only introduced a 19th man for interchange in like the 1930s. We didn't have a centre square till the 1970s. So the game is fluid and always changing, but the goal of, the AFL, when they make these rule changes, is they're being guided by the charter that's been set out for essentially what Australian rules football is. And within that, there's certain key points, things like, maintaining the physically tough and contested nature of the game are in there. Protecting players is always in there, and just maintaining, these unique characteristics of what we think Australian rules football is, regardless of what the rules actually say.
Yeah, like there's so much that isn't mentioned as well. It's crazy. Like there's so much stuff that just isn't in the charter.
I guess it more outlines like these are the themes of the game, where it's like the game is based on kicking. The game, features players running at high speed, that kind of stuff. And I think what has happened is the game, in slowing down in the last decade, has started to go away from a few of these points where it's maybe not featuring as many spectacular moments as what we want it to. So in changing the rules, people at the committee are sticking within this framework of this is what we think Australian rules football should be. But yeah, like you just said, the charter also doesn't lay out any specific rules to achieve that objective. So they kind of given like a guideline and then have to fill in the blanks in a way.
You've definitely given us some great food for thought there, Andreas. And it really just goes to show how complex a topic this is, and one that feels like we may have just only begun to scrape the surface of. A Rule Changes episode 2 might just be in order in the not so distant future. Just before we wrap up the show, I just want to end with one particular quote from the AFL Charter that really does do well to encapsulate the sentiment held by the AFL when making these changes. Rule and interpretation changes should be considered if there is an opportunity to further enhance or address changes that threaten the principles of the laws of the game. And on that note, we'll end today's show. In the meantime, you can like, comment, and subscribe to ensure you don't miss our next episode. Thanks again for listening. We've been Footy A2Z.